Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Mystics MMOs. I'm your host, Mystic Raven. All right, up and early. I'm always testing little things like values. That's right. So this is my DK build that I'm currently working on in live, and I'm using the Maelstrom Perfected daggers, precise. That's the wrong bow. But we'll be good talking about this discussion. Let me check. Okay, yeah. So I'm going to be talking about literally when is a good time to utilize axes versus. So as I mentioned, I'm using the daggers, right? Because when I come in here, you're going to see my base crit at 60%, right? So I have a 60% crit rating with this current configuration base. Now when we add major savagery to this equation, because it'll give me the buff, now we're at 66, which is pretty good. It evens out, we get that even nice number. And when we proc up Briarheart, we're getting 7,000 weapon damage. I love this configuration. It's solid. It's a solid configuration. But there becomes a question, because people stack crit, right? And they substitute critical chance for weapon damage. And the more you stack in to a critical, right? So let's talk about tooltip, for example. Right? Once I proc this up and I go into my tooltip with the Briarheart, we're getting a 25k over 14 seconds. Why? Because of our scale factor, due to the proc from the Maelstrom weapons along with Briarheart. Now if I drop down and go back up, you'll see the drop because everything falls off. Right, and when you stack critical chance, essentially that's what you're doing, right? We're decreasing that hit. So if I was to substitute, let's say, Tuscavans, right, with Briarheart, instead, all right, we're only at 23. Why? Why did it drop 2,000? Because the Briarheart. But we get an increase into the critical hit. So one of the main things that I want to point out is when we can utilize axes, right? So axes, actually, when we go into 2H or dual wield, right? We see in Twin Blade and Blunt, each axis increases our critical damage by 4%. That's 8%. But here's the problem. Even though we're increasing critical output, think of it like the Shadow Mundus is what you should look at the axes in comparison to, because it only affects critical damage, not base, which is still significant. But if we can't sustain over 70% critical, it's not very beneficial. But can we maintain that? Can we accomplish it? Well, yeah, we can. I mean, that's not a problem. I mean, once again, we go with the harpoons. And let's say, now, because Tuscavans is a pen value, right? We can actually, put on Leviathan shoulder. We can actually use a Krog's head instead of a slime crawl. Why? Because the pen value. Because currently our Mundus, because of the pen, is the lover. But because we already have a pen value associated, we can use Krogs. And now we can take the Thief Mundus. Now, by doing that, we can actually afford to give up our daggers in perspective to the axes, which gives us the extra additional. And what you end up getting is over 70 crit. Let's get that hunters up there, shall we? Now we're at 79, and it goes up to 82. $79, but I can get this up to 82. Do I have it all? Let me check. Do I? Oh, no. Oh, that's why. Gotta switch the bow, duh, Mystic. No, I got the bow. Yeah, I got it all. Okay. But anyways, once we hit over that 70, we can justify the axes. And that's where it's, you know, the hard call, right? Is trying to get that over. Now, I don't have a slime crawl. I'm using a Crocs. Why? Because my pen's at 2-1. Oh, there it was. There it was. Okay, because it was a swap out. It's like the same thing as something like Berserking 82.4. There you go. Yeah, so we can get over an 82. You know, and you can justify axes versus the daggers over 70. Why? Why would you do it? Because you're already over 70. You don't want to suffer the diminishing return. If we put on axes, we're well over exceeded, right? And at this point, because we're going to use other critical, we can lower our, and we're using another damaging modifier, we can lower pen value. But the thing about it is you have to maintain, you have to be able to accomplish over that 70% threshold. That's why I've said, you know, the Shadow Mundus is only good when you've maintained over 70. I've never utilized the Shadow because I've always scaled base damage. And the same thing applies with the axes, right? When we look at this, it's always only going to affect critical damage, not base. Swords, it does increase our base damage, thus affecting our critical. So we're going to get weapon damage. If we're under 70, we would be better off with, if we're at 70, I would say, you know, whatever, we could bump up the weapon damage. Anything over 70, axes. 70, swords. Why? Because your weapon damage. Anything under 70, daggers. So could I go with swords, for example, versus the daggers? You know, with the initial other setup I had. I could, you know, but why, you know, I'm going to take a little bit of a hit on that as well. You know, but would I get more weapon damage scale? Absolutely. So if I wanted to go with swords, for example, maces is the pen, which isn't really bad. Okay. And let's say I use the other setup I had. Now I'm a Khajiit, though. I want to try to maximize that value. Hence why I went with... But I'm just showing this for whatever. And let's say we go back like to the Dom set. We keep that. Right. And we'll have to go back to the other Mundus. Alright. And of course we would have to go back to the Lover. because we would need that pen value. Now, you'll see my weapon crit is only 52. Right? Even though I have precise, right, swords. But by utilizing the daggers, right, why is it scaling so low? You got to think precise is a percentage value. Daggers is a flat value. Right? So when we come back into twin blade and blunt, again. All right. Once again, each dagger is 812. That percentage modifier is magnified by the percentage value of the trait. That's why. So we're under. So swords wouldn't do us any good. But if I was at like a 60, I could justify. But once I go ahead and put those daggers back on, it's just, you know, the trait value multiplied by the percentage, right? So you got to multiply that. Now we come back in and we're back at 60. Right? So we get that rounded number. But if we're under 60, it's not worth taking anything, you know, other than precise. And I need penetration with this type of setup due to the configuration. But axes is very beneficial, but a lot of people disregard axes. But when you keep stacking critical value, like I said, Stam can overvalue crit faster and harder than most mag builds. Mag can max at 880 currently, even with kilt. That's a fact. Okay, that is a fact. Stam can actually do better with Berserking Warrior, but here's the kicker. Tuscavans has a penetrating value. Berserking Warrior has weapon damage. So you're still stuck trying to find a pen value somewhere. Right? You're still stuck trying to find penetration. Tuscavans does give a less value, but because of its penetrating value associated, it ends up associating with a Krog piece better than, you know, having to do it with Slime Crawl and then adjusting to what? The other value, the flat value for, you know, the trait and weapon. Because once again, sharpen is flat value. That and defending are flat values. Every other trait like Nirnholm, precise are what? Percentage based. Right? So that's a scaled percentage off of your base. So that's where it's at. These are the differences that we have to make up. And for me personally, I would always make the recommendation, if you're over a 70%, look into the axes. If you're under that 70%, then stay with your daggers. You know, if you're maintaining a 70, you know, with the major savagery, you might want to be taking a look at swords to do what? Scale up your weapon damage further. These are factors where the diminishing returns are relevant. Right? So that percentage values are adjusted accordingly. So I just hope this video helps, because when it comes down to when should we apply what weapon type, and I've always said this, you can't keep putting every class into the same pool. You cannot do that. There are going to be situations and setups, depending on group configurations, you're going to benefit better with daggers. You're going to benefit better with swords. You're going to benefit better with axes. It's about what's available in the team is how you're going to maximize your efficiency. So I hope this helps. But as always, I'm Mr. Craven. This is Mystics MMOs. Have a good one.